Okay, so good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session on the role of institutions and religion and the media. I mean, that's the session theme. But today we're going to look more specifically at the issue of religion, religious leaders, and faith-based organizations. My name is Julian Pelot. I work at UN Women in the headquarters in New York. I'm very happy to be here with our panelists. And I will introduce them to you in a second. But first, I just want to say a few words to kind of frame this session and what we're looking at. I mean, I think we all know as practitioners and activists for gender equality that we are embarked on a transformative enterprise, and that achieving gender equality requires transforming unequal power relations, changing institutions, economic and social structures, so breaking social norms and gender stereotypes, and that this transformative agenda really needs to tackle the structural underpinnings of gender inequality. We heard a lot in the plenaries and the breakout sessions about different aspects of that: unpaid care work, lack of access to assets and resources, low participation of women in decision making, sexual and reproductive health and rights, addressing violence against women. So these are all the issues that we have to tackle, and one of the themes of that symposium is the how. How do we do it? How do we engage? And men, as community, political, religious leaders, and that's the part that we're going to look at in this session, have an enormous control over these issues and over women's ability to take their own decisions and to make their own choices in these areas. So, men are heads of state, they're government officials, they're judges, they're generals, they're village heads, they're husbands, they're fathers, and in all these roles, they yield enormous power over women's lives. And that is also, of course, also true of religious leaders. And one aspect that we have also heard a lot about until now in this symposium is this issue of tension between engagement and opposition. There is a tendency to think, well, what are our enemies? What are, yesterday someone was talking about, we shouldn't be talking about a glass ceiling, but about a thick layer of men that are blocking progress for gender equality. So what is this thick layer of men, and how do we actually remove that layer? And we need to find this balance between involvement and getting them engaged without compromising our principles and the issues of accountability, and really the issue of women's rights and human rights at the core of what we do. But there is also an acknowledgement, I think, that we need to bring men in the conversation. And the first plenary, Michael Kimmel spoke about looking at ourselves in the mirror, and the fact that often men are not even aware that they have a gender. And that is also true, I think, of all these men that I have spoken about, the heads of state, the government officials, the fathers, the husbands, and the religious leaders. They don't even know sometimes about that power, and how they are exercising this power is actually hurting women in their communities, in their families, directly or indirectly. So in this session, we'll hear from three activists, experts, practitioners, researchers, all of this in these three bodies, on how they went about their work in engaging religious leaders, some of the issues that they faced, some of the entry points that they used. So very briefly, I will start by introducing them. In the middle, we have Mpho Mabena. She's a human rights activist. She works for Sonke Gender Justice in Johannesburg, South Africa. Right next to me, we have Prabhu Deepan. He has a very long name, but actually he can be called Prabhu. He's a human rights activist and practitioner based in Sri Lanka. And our first speaker today is Rabia Wakar. Did I pronounce correctly? Yeah. Who is a feminist at heart and a development practitioner by profession. She's currently working for the Norwegian Church Aid, and not the National Arts Council, as it was mentioned in your note. So this needs to be rectified, and we will definitely make that correction in the program. She has worked for American and European organizations based in Pakistan, managing their gender justice, gender-based violence, and girls' education programs. During her graduate education at Lahore University of Management Sciences, she worked on several projects with a strong fieldwork component, and while conducting research in Okara on the peasant movement against the military, which led to a change in gender relations and the rise of female leaders, she found her calling to work on women's rights. She completed her undergraduate degree in economics and went on to pursue her master's at Columbia University with a focus on gender and development. And during her graduate education, she was also selected for Merrill Lynch's Women's International Leadership Program. She has worked on projects for an Egyptian feminist NGO, the U.S. Congressional Research Service, and a think tank in Washington, D.C. Her interests include the gender impact of humanitarian assistance, Islamic feminism, and understanding masculinities to improve gender equality efforts. So Rabia, the floor is yours.
What is my presentation? I can't see that. Presentations on there?
Did they put the presentation on the...
This folder. Okay. Great. Okay, I don't need a mic or anything, right?
No.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for being here. It is an honor to be here in India. It feels almost like home, which is lovely. And I'd just like to kind of congratulate everyone involved with the organizing and moderating and all of you present. It's lovely to be here. Amazing energy. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about my organization's experience with engaging men and boys in a gender justice initiative in Pakistan. As Julian said, I work for Norwegian Church Aid, Kirkens Nødhjelp. Is there any Norwegians there? And so let me first quickly give you an introduction to what I will be talking about. I'm going to talk about how religious narratives, institutions, and leaders can lend legitimacy to efforts on GBV and for countering violence-born masculine identities. We can use religion in a positive manner to work on gender justice. And in the Pakistani context, we did this. We worked through Pakistani NGOs on a gender justice initiative. Most of the feminist organizations in Pakistan are quite reluctant to work with religious leaders because, as you might know, religion has been quite misused in Pakistan. We've had military dictatorships that have come up with all kinds of really, not even conservative religious laws, but just really repressive ones. You know, they've used the absolute worst possible interpretation of religion. And that's why I don't blame the feminists. They don't want to engage with these men who've been oppressing them forever. But NCA is a faith-based organization, and we do believe that there is a lot of untapped potential in religion if used the right way. It has to be done very, very carefully. But if feminists were to engage with these people and make sure that they actually give the right or a better interpretation, a progressive interpretation of religion, it has such huge, immense impact on the communities. Because people in villages will not listen to like donors or even urban women like me. We are worlds apart from the women living in the villages. But they will listen to their local mosque leader. They will listen to their local church priests and people in the mandirs. So that's why we thought it's important to effectively change public opinion on GBV by using their platforms, getting them to speak out. Anyways, I'm going to talk a little bit about that program that we had from 2010 to 13. Then I'm going to go on to talk about this research we did in the final year, which was looking much more closely at the men involved with our program. What kind of drives them to work on these issues? What are their notions of masculinity? I'm going to talk about how they see it and how some women see masculinity. And in the end, I'm going to give you some recommendations on working with religious leaders for GBV or for gender justice. So, our program aimed to do two things. One was to reduce the deprivation of women's inheritance, and the other one was to reduce their deprivation of choice in marriage. So basically, we wanted to make sure that women got their share of inheritance, and we wanted to make sure that women and boys and girls were not forced into marriage. Now, these are pretty critical issues, but we strategically chose them. Why? Because A, there is an overlap between the constitution and the local laws as well as religion. In religion and in the Quran, for example, because most of Pakistan is Muslim, so I think that was largely our basis, but we also made sure that Hinduism and Christianity were also taken into account. We used those sources as well to make sure that we reached out to those populations. But at least in Islam, there is no doubt that women do have a share of inheritance. It may not be the same as men and women, but it is there, it's significant, and it's just not done. In Pakistan, at least, hardly any women get their share of inheritance, although the law says so, although religion says so, and nobody denies it. But at the same time, everyone's like, yes, we know we should, but our culture is not to do it. And dowry ties in pretty closely with that. So we thought this is a good area where the law and the constitution and human rights and religion, they're all on the same page. And the same with regards to forced marriages. Forced marriages happen a lot. At the same time, religiously, it's very well known that you cannot force someone into marriage. It has to be done consensually. The law says so, religion says so, and yet we have so many forced marriages. So we thought, okay, we need to work on this. We had a rights-based approach to countering GBV, but we used religion as a good entry point, effective entry point. And so we made religious arguments to support women's constitutional rights. Just to let you know, give you a sense of the overall program, we worked with over 650 male religious leaders and over 35 female religious leaders. These were from Hindu, Christian, and Muslim communities, and within the Muslim, Shia, and Sunni, and the different schools of thought within that. And together, over the course of 3 years, they made over 8,500 religious sermons or statements in support of women's rights, against GBV, all of those. And we also looked at behavior change. We engaged young men as allies. We had a proper behavior change communication strategy. All of those different things I won't go into. This presentation is just about the working with faith institutions. But also to let you know how successful this program was, in 3 years, we were able to prevent over 60% of the forced marriages that were reported to us, that we got to know about. And of all the women who were seeking a share in their inheritance, over 65% got their share through the courts and through the law. And we also worked a little bit with jirgas, not as institutions, but making sure that communities put pressure on jirgas, or panchayats, as they're called in India, where there was alternate dispute resolution. And in 65%, or more than 65% of these cases, the decisions went in favor of women. So we had, I think, pretty overwhelming success. We also gave free legal support to nearly 500 women. It is worth noting that in many of the areas we work, women would rather go to a jirga than go to the law, the court. This is unfortunate, but it is a reality. Okay. So, working with faith-based actors and institutions. We worked through implementing partners, Pakistani NGOs. We didn't work directly. And they worked in a diplomatic manner to ensure that there were no problematic religious messages conveyed from religious institutions. The program in certain areas focused on senior religious leaders, which had a multiplier effect because it took them a while to be convinced, but once they were convinced, then they did actually train younger religious leaders on how to give the same sermons and how to do the same outreach in other areas. So that was a good multiplier effect. One of the cases of religious leaders, which I love to quote, is, our partners went to this one man and they said, we want you to talk about inheritance. And he's like, okay, can you come back after like a month or, I don't know, some weeks? And they were like, okay, fine. They came back after that many weeks. They're like, can you just, come back after one more week? Then they finally came back after 1 week, and then the religious leader told them that, look, I hadn't given my share to my sister. She had the right to get her share, and I had just taken it, and when you told me, I felt guilty, and I realized I should be doing this. This is not their job. This is my job. So I've actually given my sister her share, and now I'm going to preach about it. And that kind of had like a really strong impact, because especially if they actually live by those things themselves, like the communities know, everybody is kind of related or close by, they actually know that, okay, he gave his sister his share, when he preaches about it, it has way more impact. So we had over 700 leaders in total, and we also included certain people like nikah khwans or nikah registrars, who wouldn't typically be thought of as religious leaders, but they're the ones who, when the formalizing of the nikah is taking place, they actually ask the girl, do you consent? They ask the boy, do you consent? And they're the ones at the spot. So they have a very key role to play. They're not seen as traditional religious leaders, but we kind of work with them to say that you have to really make sure that the boys and the girls and the men and the women are consenting. In case of one such gentleman, he told me that he'd been kicked out of a house because he realized that the girl wasn't really happy about it. He could sense through her body language that she was not consenting, and said, I can't solemnize this marriage. I will not do the nikah. And they were like, fine, you get out of our house, we get another person, and that marriage did happen. But the point is, he still took a stand. All those relatives sitting there at the wedding realized, oh, okay, you can't really do this. So anyway, small steps. And then, like in one of the projects, we had 5 religious leaders forums, and these people kept meeting on a regular basis. I've seen an action plan that they had, and just the number of times they would talk about it at the Friday prayers, just amazing how seriously they took it and, followed up. Another aspect our program had was answering questions on the radio. We would talk about this on the radio, which had huge outreach, and there have been cases of girls' forced marriages being prevented because the daughter made the father listen to this radio program, and the father realized, oh, I'm going to hell if I actually do this to my child. So then he was like, okay, I'm going to postpone it. So things like that. It's important to realize that even though we didn't explicitly focus on nonviolent models of masculinity, we did look at all the men involved in our program in, we didn't kind of think that they're all the same. There are some partner staff who are very dedicated activists who are working with us. There are some young men in communities that are impacted by the changes that our program and other changes are bringing about. There are secondary duty bearers, the Jirga, that have immense power. There are boys in communities, like I said. There is a brother of a GBV survivor. He's very affected by the forced marriage that his sister was about to go through. Then there are religious leaders who have a huge role to play. There is a rights holder, a survivor of violence, whose marriage, a love marriage, was frowned upon, and he faced huge kinds of obstacles. So we can't treat them all the same. Then there's state representatives, community activists, and that little boy is getting married. He's probably under 10. And with the religious minority communities, in the Hindu and the Christian communities, we see this, especially in the Hindu communities in Pakistan, there's a lot of insecurity, unfortunately. And because of that, they feel like the whole honor being violated thing means that they want to get their children married off earlier. And also because they might be a bit poorer, a bit marginalized, so they wouldn't have other alternatives. So they think that getting, the children married that early is fine. So we work with them as well because, they have this whole other set of constraints which are also important to consider. So you can see a Friday prayer sermon going on. The gentleman is talking about, in the top left corner, they're talking about women's rights. Then below that, there's a radio program going on, and there are women and men sitting and answering questions. On the top right corner, you see a Muslim religious leader sitting in a mandir and praying for this, for peace in the country. And I think that's pretty impressive, given that those of you familiar with the ongoings in Pakistan would think it is pretty cool that there's a Muslim religious leader sitting in a mandir and praying with him. I would just like to play this 1.5 minute clip.
विरासत अल्लाह की तरफ से उसको अता करदा हक है। अल्लाह ने औरत को उसका हक दिया, उसको कोई महरूम नहीं कर सकता, उसका वो हक कोई तलब नहीं कर सकता, वो उसको मिल के रहेगा। जो उसे अल्लाह और उसका रसूल दे रहे हो, कुरान दे रहा हो, उसको दुनिया का कोई कानून और कोई शख्स रद्द नहीं कर सकता। जो दहेज के सबब बेशुमार लोगों का ये तर्ज जिंदगी है कि वो औरत को सोना भी दे देंगे, मुतअद्दिद सामान भी दे देंगे और अकीदा ये बना देंगे क्योंकि हमने अपनी बेटी को इतना दे दिया है कि जितना उसका हिस्सा बनता था या कसीर तादाद में उसे वाक़ई जहेज दे दिया है। इस सबब से वो अपने जिंदगी के अंदर ही बहुत से लोग अपनी जायदाद अपने बेटों के नाम मुंतकिल कर देते हैं और वो इंदल्लाह अगर बेटी को महरूम करके सिर्फ बेटों में मुंतकिल कर रहे हैं, अल्लाह के नज़दीक वो मुजरिम है। दहेज के सबब बेशुमार हमारी रसूमात बातिला हैं, उनके वजह से औरत को विरासत में महरूम कर दिया जाता है। अल्लाह और उसके रसूल ने उसे हिस्सा जो दिया, कोई शख्स भी उससे वो हक नहीं ले सकता, वो उसको मिल के रहेगा। इसलिए वालिदैन को हमें माशरे में इस चीज़ की तबलीग करनी चाहिए, ये शऊर दिलाना चाहिए कि जो अल्लाह ताला ने मुकर्रर कर दिया है वो मुकर्रर कर दिया है, उससे इनहराफ खुली गुमराही है, बल्कि अल्लाह रसूल के खिलाफ ऐलान जंग है। जब
So as you can see, it's a pretty powerful tool, and I think there was no theory of change formally associated with the program, but then the way I see it is the understanding is that if a poor woman is kind of like, inferior in terms of power to a richer woman, and then on top of that there is a man, a poor man maybe, on top of that there's a rich man. In this kind of a hierarchy where there's class differences, religious differences, lots of other things, right at the top is religion, which is like, in most cases a patriarchal institution, but the power is so great that when men oppress women and they treat them as like objects, the one thing that can turn them into rights holders is religion, because it is so much more superior to the men at the very top of the hierarchy. So that's the model that they used, and you can see they're like trying to scare everyone off that you will go to hell if you don't give the women their rights. And that really works, because you don't need a state or anything to like, oh my god, I'm going to hell. So that's a little bit of our model. We work at the individual level with positive messaging. Youth are engaged, they're good role models, they're told that they can be better, and actually religion wants them to be better and like better human beings. And one thing I would like to talk about, every time we worked in the communities, people would ask us, oh, so you're against forced marriages. That means you're trying to promote love marriages. And in Pakistan that would mean, okay, elopement, people running away together, Bollywood style, all that. And then we would say, no, we are not actually like promoting love marriages. What we are trying to say is that a marriage of consent, razamandi, is very important, which means the boy and the girl, first and foremost, must agree to it. And yes, we would like if the family is also in agreement, like everyone is agreeing with the marriage. But you have to realize that if you're forcing someone into marriage, there are higher chances of a love marriage. People will be forced to elope because you're forcing them to marry somebody they don't like. So then they would get this logic. They'd be like, okay, now we get it, And anyway, we basically try to work on promoting a progressive brand of religion where women's rights were ensured. And we had like many positive results. One of them was that there was, in one of our districts, there was an increase of 25% in the enrollment rate of girls. So, and then, things like, we used some innovative ideas like calendars were basically held, calendars were like put up in mosques, and these calendars had verses from the Quran that were like empowering women. They were all about, okay, these are the rights, and the best fathers are those that will take care of their daughters and all of that. And students were informed about their religious and legal rights in schools and colleges and universities.
That's good.
Should I just finish up?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, and they would basically we worked on trying to improve their negotiation skills. So if a boy and a girl were going to be forced into marriage, we made sure that they had the religious arguments and they knew who to go to, like that radio program, what to do in case they were being forced. And they could like quote ayats, they could just give religious references and say, you're doing something wrong. And that did work, more than anything. Anyway, one important thing was we also tried to promote interfaith harmony. So the Hindu, Christian, Shia, Sunni, all the different religions sitting together and talking about women's rights brought them closer together. And we saw in one case where there was like, almost going to happen, there was a eviction of Hindu community, like really the scheduled castes of the Hindus, they were going to be forced off their land. Because of these ties that were developed, they actually protected them and they said, you can't do that. So we saw these other positive things happen. Quickly about the research that I was supposed to talk about. So we did this in the 5 districts that we've been working in. And this is like based on a small sample of the gender justice champions. You can see that there are like about 20 odd champions from most of the districts except for Gujarat. Gujarat is the one district where I feel like we weren't as successful as the rest of the places. The rest of the places were primarily rural, and there was very high youth involvement. In Gujarat, there was very low youth involvement, and there was actually the highest involvement of really old people. And they were just sitting there making sure that nothing is actually going against the tradition. And I think the reason I feel like we didn't succeed there is because there is a diaspora community there. In Gujarat, there are a lot of Pakistanis who go to Norway and other parts of Scandinavia, Europe, and they've seen a lot of the world. And when they've gone to these foreign countries, they've kind of been challenged about their culture. So they've held on to culture so strongly and so rigidly that they won't give it up, not even for religion, which is why our model didn't work. These people were urban, they had more education, they were better off economically. These were rich people, which meant there was a lot of land in question. So when we want girls to get their share of land, this is too much like money being talked about. And the older men were sitting there making sure that the young people weren't doing anything outrageous. There were much more rigid gender roles, and they were mostly housewives. And getting women to not work was seen as a status symbol. We are so successful, so rich that our wives don't work, which meant they had lower mobility and less access to information and all. Deeply entrenched cultural practices, less say of religious leaders, and that's why if you look at our hierarchy, that religion is at the top. Maybe it wasn't so much in this case, because these people were just too rich for that. They didn't take religion on so seriously. There was a suicide of a girl related to forced marriage, and they were just like, they would not let us work, even though we reached out to religious leaders. But our project was not as successful. Anyway, so some notions of justice and culture. One male supporter said, they say justice is blind. I say justice is not blind. It can easily see who is rich and who is poor and give the judgment accordingly. In case of giving property and other rights to women, justice only listens to the rich. It also assures that the males get the benefit. And then this other female beautician thought that the existing justice system was totally male dominated, where a woman's entry to seek justice was like prohibited, and that's the reason that they made sure the atmosphere in the courts, the revenue department, the police stations is totally male, where a woman is not welcome. If she does take up her courage to enter these premises, she's thought to be of loose character. And culture was seen as our customs and our traditions, the way we love and our social and religious values all together define religion. For some people, the religion was the sole arbiter of and definer of culture. Thus, for a number of persons, culture was just completely unchanging. And for a few others, culture was so powerful that both Hindu and Christian communities said that we can't give our inheritance share to our sisters because Muslims don't do so. It's just not done. So that is how complex it is. Anyway, you know about traditional notions of masculinity. I have like 2 slides left. And basically they saw it as expressed through sexual harassment and assault and psychologically tramping all over the opinions that were different from the heads of the household. They thought masculinity is male bonding, making fun of women before other men, in case, some husband might be called henpecked husband or something. And masculinity or manhood is a continuous attempt by males to keep women in check so that they remain unconditionally subservient to men and are morally upright, chaste, and confined to the 4 walls of the house. There's zero contact with outside men because of protection, because a woman is weak, not wise, she squanders money whenever she has access to it, and she's not required to give her opinion on any issue unless she's told to do so. And another expression of masculinity was control over the wife after she was married. Household controls included son preference and things like, not giving adequate nutrition to girls, education, higher education, and servant-like treatment given out to women with absolutely no expectation of hearing a no. And social expressions of masculinity were getting rid of the females in the house through early marriages, through forced marriages, with decades of an age difference at times. Masculinity is expressed through total subjugation to the marriage contract, to the nikah nama terms, decided by women with no regard to a woman's opinion. And a married woman is told that the cost of her dowry was taken out of her share in property. As long as she doesn't demand her share, her brothers are happy. The moment she demands her share, she's ostracized as her attempt of challenging male supremacy, and masculinity is not tolerated. Anyway, so there were changed notions of masculinity, which were that masculinity is not to beat up a woman who is no match for a man in physical strength, and actually raising your hand to beat a woman is certainly unmanly. And new masculinity was seen as greater interspousal communication, not feeling ashamed in the public of being close to your spouse, and consultation with women on different issues within the household, promoting gender justice in public forums, and expressing empathy with gender justice in influential positions. Masculinity with change in ideas is more about protecting rather than harming women, educating rather than keeping women ignorant, giving sisters their share in inheritance, and providing equal opportunities to women in all fields. Maintenance of this change requires replication and acceptance by others, and change men need personal support, recognition of new information, and program input. So anyway, my last slide. My recommendations are that we try and build a new model, faith for human rights, rather than destroy an existing one, which is organized religion used as a force of oppression. For dealing with faith-based institutions, it's critical to build your own capacity on faith matters, religious doctrine, and practice, and demonstrate it in a subtle manner, so that, the doubts that they have about NGOs having this Western agenda, you can challenge them without doing it very overtly. Subtly let them see your, knowledge about the issue. And using the right terminology can make a big difference. They'll take you much more seriously. Bring different groups together on one platform and facilitate dialogue in a respectful environment. You should really also believe that not all religious leaders are misogynists, and give them, approach them with an open mind, give them space, give them time to change. Don't convert the converted. Sometimes the biggest opponents have the greatest potential, and we've seen that. They've done really amazing work. And make sure that you use the religious leaders platform to propagate the right message, and be wary of being co-opted. Feminist groups can make sure that there are checks and balances, none of the wrong messages are going out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rabia. Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. I think you really gave us not only an idea of the concept and the approaches that you use, but also some very concrete examples and some good anecdotes of the reality of what it means to engage with faith-based leaders. So let's move to our second presenter, and that is Prabhu. Prabhu is, as I said, a human rights activist and practitioner based in Sri Lanka. In the last 7 years, he has contributed to the gender, sexual, and gender-based violence, engaging men, HIV and AIDS, human rights, and youth engagement work of many local and international organizations, both in Sri Lanka and around the world. In the last 18 months, he has been working for the HIV and sexual violence unit of Tear Fund as a technical advisor for their work on prevention and response to sexual and gender-based violence in Rwanda, Burundi, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, specifically focusing on the work of engaging men and masculinities in the Great Lakes region of Africa, and that's what he is going to talk to us about today. His work in this region also involves the men, faith, and masculinity studies of Rwanda, Burundi, and DRC, and the extensive training of Christian church and community leaders, local and international NGO staff, and activists on working with men and boys within a faith context in these respective countries. So we're changing regions and we are changing religion, but maybe we'll also see some similarities with some of the experience from Pakistan.
Thank you, Julian. As you can see, I have a very long name. My parents didn't think too much about this day. So I go by the name of Prabhu Deepan, and this is not the name of the panel, by the way. It's quite long. So as Julian said, I work with Tear Fund in their sexual violence prevention unit, and I work primarily in the Great Lakes region of Africa, Rwanda, Burundi, and DR Congo. And I focus on the work around engaging men and boys, specifically work with the Christian church leaders. I'm based in Sri Lanka, so it's not very common to see somebody like my profile speak about something in Africa. I guess you'll keep an open mind, as I have kept an open mind for the last 18 months to do this work. Okay, so a bit about Tear Fund, since my supervisor is here. I'm just kidding. Tear Fund is a Christian relief and development agency based in the UK, working in about 54 countries, primarily working through the church as partners and other partners, and we are not limited to working only with Christian communities, but also to extended communities based on the need. And we are currently, the sexual violence prevention program is currently in 8 countries. That's in Rwanda, Burundi, DR Congo, Liberia, Tanzania, Central African Republic, South Sudan, and South Africa. And if I miss anything, I will come back to it later. And our primary kind of strategy or approach to working with faith leaders and faith communities is by engaging faith leaders on this issue of sexual violence, and also empowering them to be advocates of this issue, but also to create a safe space for survivors of sexual violence, but also men and boys to talk about their transforming identities, and building a movement of survivors. We are critically committed to the voices of survivors being central to the response and shaping the response of our work. And then also building a knowledge around what is working with with working with faith leaders. Is it working, and documenting, because there's so much going on, but there's so little evidence to it. So that's kind of the 5 key areas that we focus on. So I did a presentation, but I think I have ADHD. So last night around 12 o'clock I decided I'm not going to do a presentation, so I started writing down. Now I'm struggling to read what I have written down. So anyways,
sounds like me.
So I mean, I don't think anybody here questions why it is important to engage faith. We all know, I mean, we are South Asian, African, we know faith plays a crucial role. And I was looking up statistics about global faith, and 90% of them are, affiliated some form of organized, faith. And so it doesn't, I don't think anybody here is here because they don't believe that faith is crucial, critical. It is critical to our lives in some form, faith or no faith. It's up to you, and it shapes behavior and cultural norms and practices, etc. The context that I'm talking about, Rwanda, Burundi, and DR Congo, about 80+%. I mean, in Congo, like 94+% of them affiliate themselves to the Christian faith, and in the region that's very kind of common. Like you have massive presence of Christian communities. And so, I mean, this session is called Religion, Media, and Culture, and I think one thing I have to acknowledge, we have to acknowledge, is that for some people in this community that I'm talking about, faith, these religions are the media and culture to them. That's the only thing, the form of voice they have in shaping from their world opinion to current affairs to who cooks and who doesn't cook at home. So I think it's important to acknowledge that where we cannot reach, where our messages from the symposiums can't reach, the faith communities can reach to them, and they're present and have been present and will be present beyond our existence and this movement. So I think it's important to acknowledge and bring them onto this conversation, because they have a critical role to play. And then the context that I'm talking about is post-conflict or in-transit context and in conflict settings in these countries, where faith communities have been present prior to the conflict and during the conflict and post-conflict, also in constructing, kind of reconfiguring in just going forward. And we talk about the ecological model, and I'm glad that you brought that up, as faith actors and communities are influential in each sphere of those models. Like they are in this country, three countries, not at the individual level in terms of behavior and attitudes, but also in terms of relationships and in communities, in forming norms, etc., practices, and also in terms of policies. They are massively influential over political processes and also politicians and the governance of the country. So it'll be very ignorant to not to engage them. Okay, and yeah, so I think one of the things, like I come from Sri Lanka, so basically, I can relate to the conflict aspect of it. I grew up in the war, and one of the things that I keep thinking is that for most of them, faith is also the only good thing that they have going in their lives, irrespective of how bad it is, how bad we perceive it to be, and to get through to the next level, for next Sunday, to hear something positive. So, you're going to have, at least you suffer this, you're going to have a good life, afterlife. So you endure either hunger, the abuse, the discrimination, all that you face in the community, disempowerment and all that, and you hear this message of hope. You have eternal life, and so it gives them a leaf of life for at least the next 6 days till they hear another sermon. So we have to acknowledge that they do play a positive role, and for some of us who grown up in the conflict, that's the only thing that we had going, and there's nothing else that we had to hold on to. So it becomes a critical aspect of their lives, and you can't engage them outside of that. And then you kind of knock off their support system if you say, let's address from this point of faith as a negative influence, or faith as something bad, something irrelevant to the context that we live in today. And that that conversation is not going anywhere, right? So I think you understand like why faith matters, and from my perspective of this Great Lakes region. I want to speak specifically about the work that we do with Tear Fund in Great Lakes region, and so the work is still in it's ongoing. So in fact, I've just written from South Sudan 5 days ago, so there's no kind of documented like slides and things like that I can show you. But I do have the report of the Transform Masculinities, which Veena has at the back, and the summary reports which you can pick up, very limited copies where you can have and I can email it to them if you want. Yeah. So when we wanted to work with respond to sexual violence, Tear Fund did a study called Silent No More, because we felt that the faith communities, especially Christian, I would say Christian community has been very silent on this issue. They're not talked about it, they're not denounced violence, they're not broken the silence around it. So it was called Silent No More. Basically, it's very implicated, like what that means. We asked the survivors of sexual violence what have their experiences been, and how do you see the church's response to this has been, and also what do you want it to be. So we took that to the highest level possible. We work with the Anglican Communion as the primary partner and other faith-based Christian organizations. So Archbishop Justin Welby and Lambert Palace, etc., they launched this program and saying that there will be no silent moment committing to respond to this. So our work in Rwanda, Burundi, and DR Congo is also primarily through the Anglican Communion, which has about 45% penetration or presence in the countries, and more and somewhat a powerful voice with the archbishops and their wives together through the different structures to respond to this issue. So that's how it started, and like I said, it was critical that we listen to the voices of survivors. And this work has been going on for some time, and then we knew that we wanted engagement and voice, like I said, the strategy, but we also started off by asking this question, doing a baseline study around, it was like I was saying, men, faith and masculinities. Is there an influence, is there a connection between, masculine identities and faith? And study, and also a baseline study to understand the context a bit more, and what do we really want to address? Because we all know, the consequences of sexual violence, we already know and the root causes and the different factors, etc. But we needed to get the in-between of where do we intervene, where is intervention going to be more successful. So I think that's the study kind of informed the design of the interventions and how we want to respond, the messaging, etc. We did group surveys and focus group discussions with about 1,232 people across the 3 countries, both men and women, because of course we all know that women hold are shaping masculine identities and also gatekeepers to some of these identities, etc. And what was found is, again, I'm not going to go in depth with the presentation, the findings of the study. If you can access them, you can get a hold of the study. But what it primarily finds is, of course, the 3 countries are very different in nature. If you know Rwanda, Burundi, and Congo, being the recent one that's kind of doesn't have a very more organized, conflict. But do they have lots of rebel groups there? And it's a massive country. But Rwanda has been in transit. It's one of the fastest developing countries in Africa, and massive infrastructure is coming up, but also it's in transition, like I said. And Burundi is quite struggling with politically right now. Elections are coming up, so it's all over. But some of the responses are very consistent across, and some of them are very different. And when you, in terms of, especially in terms of attitudes, etc., where you find the Rwandese men and women were more positive, more they would say disagree with kind of harmful notions and etc. But you will understand when we do focus on discussion and kind of deconstruct this kind of conversations, we understand it's deep rooted, it's within the home, and it's not something that they're comfortable talking about, but it is there. And so whereas the Congolese, it's present to them, it's in their faces, and they're very open about it. And both of them had different impact on their lives. Especially the Congolese, the men responded differently because they felt a crisis of identity as a man, because the kind of growing trend of women becoming primary providers and involved in income generating activities, and also the things that's happening to women in the community, there's a sense of loss of their manhood, as if I as a man, the 2 primary things that you are supposed to do, protect and provide, is not able to do it anymore. And so you find men feeling, what my thumbs up?
No.
Oh. That's a bad sign. We find the men, conflicted with the identities because they don't feel man enough, because they can't protect their women and the children or wife at home, but also they aren't able to provide. So there was a conflict that was brought back home, this crisis of identities, which they feel strongly sometimes having to reinforce and reclaim the spaces as men. So sometimes resorting to violence in terms of controlling and disciplining. And lots of it was attributed to scriptures, where male order, that believing that God created man superior to women, taking really kind of interesting examples, like from, because a woman is one bone of the man, therefore she's insignificant and inferior, and things like that, which were being attributed. And also in terms of relationships, like, quoting scriptures, sometimes half the scriptures, to reaffirm their position of power. And then also because he's the head of the house, because the Bible says, man is the head of the house, as Christ is the head of the church, and all this stuff, that they had to discipline and control. And sometimes it's not only just so that the wives will respect them, but also the children will respect them because they do that, and also the community will know that he's the man of the house. She obeys him, and then also at the end of the day he feels like a man. So we've found that faith was massively influential, not only about the identities, but also how they relate to one another and the communities, and in that shaping behavior and knowledge, etc. And also we've also found the silence of the church was kind of around this was alarming, and we needed to engage with them and needed to kind of respond to that. women's rights. I mean, therefore, women's rights and their autonomy and their control over body, decision making over whether they have sex or not or reproduce or not, all just non-existent because it's not something that they themselves don't believe that they have the right to. And most of the women in these communities can't read. They've never read the Bible. They don't own a Bible. So all they hear is what the pastor preaches, and then what the husband tells him. And sometimes, like I grew up in church setting, so I knew a lot of Bible verses, which came out really handy. But like half in scriptures, which other half they've never heard the other half, which kind of tells the other opposite thing. For instance, like submit your husbands, but also husbands love your wife, like Christ loved the church and died for the church. So what does it mean for as a man to give up yourself for somebody you love? And so conversations like that they've never had, and they never could even interpret or read, or if they didn't know the Bible. So it was inaccessible to them by structural limitations, but also like who they were as women.
Have about 2 minutes.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so I think what we try to do, I mean, one of the things that we started responding is like we needed to know, engage the leadership of the church. They needed to be consistent with the theology, and they needed to, and that theology, and in the nice thing about organized religion is there's some kind of structure, and so that using the leadership at the highest level, from the archbishops to the dioceses to the parishes, to make sure that there is consistency in theology around at least agreeing on certain things like gender equality. And so we trained and engaged with them from a theological parameter or a theological framework, because that not human rights approach is not going to work. You're not going to go and tell them, oh, beating women is bad, and it's not going to work. Not to the church leaders. I'm talking about the communities. You needed to say this is God, who's saying, and it says in the Bible. So it's not something that you're cooking up or making up. It is in the Bible. So it's about how do we relook at theology from not your cultural harmful practices from your cultures, and try to adapt them to your culture to support your harmful practices. How do you relook them and promote these new and transformed values? So our conversations with them around transforming masculinities is about how do we look at alternative models. Most of them have never seen a positive role model. When they see pictures of me cooking and cleaning, they laugh at me and think, you're not a man, kind of thing. But how do we change that? And how do church leaders become also positive models for leadership? Because the models for leadership they exhibit at the church on a Sunday is something that's been replicated also in different ways at home, and the models they've seen around them. So it's reinforced through on a Sunday service. So we started changing that, working with training the highest leadership possible on engaging them, and also like engaging them from this perspective of how do we transform. They are also men, and how do you transform their attitudes? How do you transform their thinking, their knowledge? And then also using the same scriptures to go down to the communities and work with men directly, and how do you transform their attitudes? And simple things have gone a long way. I mean, I don't have time to talk about the impact, but we've seen men like pastors saying, I realized I've been raping my wife because there was no consent involved, and men saying, I did this to her because she didn't bring my watch to me or something, and things like that. And also women, opening up. And so we started creating spaces for both men and women to start talking about not only their challenges but also their vulnerabilities. For men to talk, I feel challenged, I can't provide, I don't feel like a man. But creating that space within to say, there is benefit in this shared responsibility in the roles, and and not being so rigid around gender identities, but also promoting shared values and in the home. So there was benefit for both of you, because there's a problem of communication and also like saying these are lines that we can't cross. These are boundaries that can't cross because that's a biblical order. So I think our conversations was about promoting gender equality and talking about positive models of leadership and masculinities. Example, we take the life of Jesus Christ, who talks about leadership. He says the first shall be the last and the last shall be the first. And he says those who humble themselves to be exalted, and things like that. Where he was a servant leader, and I was like, what would you do if he was here? He would be washing your feet. What do you do? And then also this thing about love your neighbor and things like that. So using scriptures to say how, if that's the model, that's what you're aspiring to be as a man, as a Christian, isn't that something wrong with the model? And then promoting that alternative models, because we feel that we cannot change this concept of headship with them. It's going to take a long time. We're not going to go and say you can't. You're the head of the house now. You're not the head of the house, because that's kind of said in the Bible. So it's very But what we've seen working for us is changing the attributes of headship. How do we change this to become positive? About creating spaces, about creating room for women to also aspire to be who, and creating space for them to be themselves, and enjoy the rights and access those things as well. So we've seen church leaders accompanying women not only to hospitals but also legal services to help them to get justice. So the church is also, we promote the principle of respecting the law of the land, because the Bible is very clear about that you respect the law of the land, and also the principles of human rights and things that we want to promote. So they're not contradicting. They're not saying, "Oh, go back home." It's just that I pray for him. No, it's harmful. So things like that are key components of the work that we do and engage in, and we've seen so much of positive things. And I think it's great because why? Because imagine if this becomes a part of the mandate of the church. You're thinking about 1.2 billion people every Sunday hearing this message of equality, and think of the impact that you can have in the lives of people, women and girls, and men and boys as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
There are a couple of research studies which are just here in the front. You can take a copy if you're interested.
Yeah. So we'll come to that also later. But thank you very much, Prabhu, and very interesting points. I think this whole issue of, and we can come back to that on the discussion, but I think this whole issue of how scriptures define masculinity and how you can also use scriptures to redefine masculinity is something also that came in your presentation, Rabia. It's something very interesting and that we have to look at later also in the discussion. But let's move to Mpho to give you the time also to do your presentation. So Mpho is a human rights activist, as I said, who works for Sonke Gender Justice in Johannesburg, in South Africa. She's been for 4 years at Sonke now, and she has worked with refugees and migrants, and currently works with how religious leaders and faith-based organizations can engage on working with men and boys. Mpho was born in Zimbabwe, and she's a journalist by academic. Her love for ending sexual violence and promoting gender equality was influenced after being exposed to the International Human Rights Exchange Program from WITS University in South Africa. Mpho dreams of seeing a better Africa where human rights are respected and enjoyed by everyone, and we're very happy to hear a bit about your work on how to make that dream come true.
Thank you so much to my two colleagues over here. I feel like they said everything. I've just had a lot of linkages on the work that we do, both in Asia as well as in Africa. But before I started, I just wanted to let you know that by the time I end this presentation, at least 3 women will be raped in South Africa, according to various statistics that we have. A woman is raped every 4 minutes in South Africa. So I just want to give you a brief background of how South Africa is, because I'm going to speak more about the South African situation. So South Africa is relatively a religious country. You find there about 74% of people who align themselves to some form of Christianity, with about 15% to those who align to traditional African religion, and about 3% that align to other religions, with about 8% that don't align to any form of religion at all. So we see that there is a huge influence of religion itself. Again, there is high unemployment rates. There is also racial divides in all the communities. And you also find that South Africa is still a patriarchal society. And of course, there are high cases of sexual gender-based violence. So the findings really, through all the interventions that I've been exposed to while working at Sonke, is that women and girls are the ones who are always vulnerable to sexual violence, while the men have been perpetrators most of the time. So we also noticed that with women, we are the ones who usually go to church in multitudes compared to the men. But then there's a big question of where are the men? Which form of religion or belief do they align to? Because a majority of people who go to churches or mosques are women. And then the other finding is that there's a lack of positive male role models who are religious, who are willing to speak out about gender-based violence. If you try to think right now, a religious role model who speak about gender-based violence, we can pick a few. And then the other finding is that the biblical texts, they're viewed or seen from a male perspective. We see that even the number of the male writers the male authors in the Bible, majority of them are men, and we hardly celebrate the voices of the women, the likes of Ruth and Dorcas in the Bible. So that's another finding that I just wanted to share with you. So the work that we do, the methods that we use as Sonke Gender Justice are using the text to try and engage men and boys, because we know that the whole story on gender imbalances goes back to the story of creation. On Monday, when we're having, was it Tuesday, when we're having the satellite sessions with the youth caucus, a colleague from Botswana said this whole gender issue started from creation. It's all through creation. And if you look at that, Prabhu also mentioned it, this whole misinterpretation of the text. We'll tend to want to support or use the Bible as a tool that will support our beneficial needs. For example, the text that he gave, that wives submit to your husbands. When I was growing up, that's all that I had. If a priest was marrying a couple, that's the only part that I got to hear. I only got to be exposed to the other part of the verse when I was now grown up. So, which is something that is really, there's room for our religious leaders to try and tell us all these texts in a positive way. And I feel like I'm just repeating Prabhu. Some of the issues is stolen from me. But then again, another method that we have used is using Christ as a role model. Like I said earlier on, we hardly hear positive religious male role models. So the way that we do is through using Christ as a huge role model, in that the text, when it continues, it says, men, love your wives as Christ loved the church. And imagine how Christ loved the church, and you as a man, how much that love is towards your wife. So those are some of the positive messages that we're using the Bible to preach about. Not to preach, to spread the message of gender equality. And we have a tool that we use called the One Man Can, that is has been seen as very powerful in engaging men and boys in South Africa. So what we're currently doing is adapting it to include Bible verses that are linked to the various activities that we have in that manual. So I'm really hoping that in the next time that wherever we may meet, we'll be having a copy of that you could also use in your interventions. And the other issue, an interesting issue that I realized when I was in Malawi, like I said, usually religious leaders don't really get to preach the positive messages, the Bible verses. It's only now that I realize that, you know, when you talk about men doing house chores, there's a supporting verse or a supporting story that we could use. And that's the story of Jacob and Esau, whichever way that you think is doable. Jacob loved to cook. He loved to cook, while his twin brother, on the other hand, was a hunter. So men can do house chores. It's even supported through the Bible. So these are such messages that we also need to hear, so that we can also empower the boys to also start doing house chores in a biblical way. And the other messages that we use as methods are those of peace and reconciliation. Men are the heads of the houses. Men are the fathers, the priests, the men. They are men. So for them to be men, we have to make them as peace lovers. Even the Bible has it. Matthew 18, when Peter asked Jesus, how many times should I forgive a person? And Jesus replies, 70 times, 7 times. So imagine if you have a quarrel with your wife at home. How many times should you forgive her? The Bible has the answer. So these are some of the messages that we want to really preach to our young men and men out there, in that peace and reconciliation can be applied in our modern time. And again, the other method that we felt is really powerful is through using religious leaders themselves. We know how powerful they are. I'll give another example in South Africa, where we have a pastor who is so powerful that he convinced his congregation that they can eat grass for them to get deliverance. And the congregation did eat grass, and they were saying it tastes like macaroni. And weeks later, he went on to tell them to drink petrol, and they did drink petrol. And the congregations were saying it tastes like orange juice. So you see the level of power that religious leaders have. Imagine if that pastor were to stand in the pulpit and say, "Men, don't abuse your wives." All the men would not abuse their wives at all. That's how powerful religious leaders are. So some of the work that we have done with Tear Fund on the We Will Speak Out coalition, we found that there are some religious leaders who are coming out, who are really using the pulpit. For example, in South Africa with Archbishop Makgoba, who is pioneering the We Will Speak Out coalition in South Africa, and Archbishop Isingoma, who is in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So those are some of the methods that we've used and seen how powerful they are. And, well, engaging men and boys, the successes, if I may be allowed to talk about them. Well, churches generally, they are accessible and they're available 7 days a week. Even if we go now, I'm sure if we need some quiet time, we're allowed to enter a church and just be at peace without anyone disturbing us and seeking that divine intervention. And the other thing, churches have the infrastructure. You talk about schools. Churches run schools. You talk about the clinics. Churches do run clinics. And just the church itself, the infrastructure is there. So how you get men and boys? Through schools, through the clinics. You can get them there. And the other question that I posed earlier on where men are when women are in church, where are they? They love to be in entertainment spaces. They love to be in sport outings. They love to be in bars and taverns. That is the fact. So what do we do then? Can't we reach out to men where they are? Can we not have the religious leaders going into taverns and preaching to the men there? Well, not really preaching, but spreading the message, because I can just imagine the chaos when a pastor is trying to preach and I'm having the bottle and I'm thinking that wouldn't work. But I'm sure there are some interventions that could be done by our Christian activities, our Christian community. And the other thing is to really have we have active community action team members who are from the religious community who are spreading this good news. I would like to believe I'm one of them, as I'm spreading this good news with you of some of the interventions that we've had in Africa. And again, something that I've usually seen, that is when I was growing up.
Okay, maybe we can take the publications at the end, so we can let Empo finish her presentation, and there will be plenty of time to take the publications at the end. Yeah.
Okay, as I was saying, when I was growing up, I'm a staunch Catholic, baptized and confirmed. But something that, I don't know whether it's because I'm being exposed to these issues now when I'm working at Sonke as a human rights activist. We used to have youth camps. So we go on an outing to have some spiritualness in us. But all we spoke about was the Bible, the church, and that's where it ended. But we were youth. It's not what we wanted to hear. I mean, there are social issues that are happening all around us. Issues of relationships, issues of sexual reproductive health and rights. Those are the issues that we wanted to talk about. But because there is a structure that we have to confine to, those were some of the issues that I think I'm now exposed to, that I feel, and I wish that churches could create that space for us as young people. I'm still young, by the way, that they can open up for us. And again, the We Will Speak Out that I spoke about, you can Google that and find out more about it. It was also shown that religion can really fight sexual gender-based violence in our communities. Now the challenges, it's been spoken about throughout the symposium, the gender box. Men, they are still unwilling really to share off that power. I don't know why the fear of wanting to share this power so that we have this form of gender equality. Well, we still also dwell back on misinterpreting the text. And the other idea or the other notion, the challenge that is there, is that there is only one text, the Bible. And there are various audiences. So we are reading the same Bible verse, but there is multiple ways that we can interpret that scripture. So there is a need. I don't know how we could do it, but on just trying to get the beautiful the scriptures that are there in the Bible that could really empower, especially women and children. And the other challenge I would say is something that I also spoke about earlier on, in that some of the religious leaders that we are having in our community are really not doing a good job in trying to spread good news, the good messages. The example that I gave of the pastor who's giving the congregation petrol, it's also another challenge, in that there are so many harmful religious practices that are happening around in our society nowadays. And the other challenge I would say is not having a multi-faith approach. It's still predominantly, this is my experience, it's predominantly Christian, and the Muslims are doing their own thing by themselves. So that unity of saying multi-faith, So in conclusion, it's something that has been researched by some researchers and theologians and founders and everyone, that there's a less percentage of men who are violent. But the problem is the multitude of those good men don't want to stand up and say that, not in my name. I will not allow a woman to be raped, not in my name. But men continue to be silent, even at church level. And again, the churches, they need to become safe spaces for both women and girls and children, because this is where we find peace and stability. And the other notion on working with men and boys, we really need men and boys in peace-building activities. We would love to, I would love to see a situation where men are praying with survivors of sexual abuse. Not praying for them because they don't know what they're going through, but praying with them, getting that space to sit down with them and really get to show their support, that they are there, and there are some men who are really willing to say, not in my name. Again, there's just a need for more interventions within churches to promote gender equality for women and girls, men and women to work together as equal partners. And I'll also say the need to support faith-based organizations when they try to promote the issues of gender equality. And I think one last thing on my conclusion is also the need for gender training in seminaries where these upcoming religious leaders are informed of gender issues and how they could use the pulpit to not degrade women. And again, like I said before, the churches are always available. So the religious leaders also to get training on counseling, specifically on gender-based violence, because as I understand it, they do undergo counseling, but not specifically on gender-based violence. And then lastly, Juliet did speak that I do dream to see a better Africa where human rights are enjoyed. But I think of recent, the main reason why I decided to leave the media and come into this human rights field is because I want to see my daughter to grow up in a world where she will not become a statistic one day. The earlier statistic, when I said by the time I end this presentation, at least 3 women will be raped in South Africa. This is the thing that keeps me going in this work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And again, I think your presentation really brings together a lot of the things that we have heard before and re-emphasizes the issue of interpretation, the issue of reaching out and really finding the allies among the religious leaders. So thank you for that. I'm going to open the floor for questions and comments, but before I do so, I just wanted to put a question to the panel also, so you have time to think. I see there are already some hands up, but so that you have time to also think about your question. And that is the issue of resistance within the religious leaders community themselves, because of course religious leaders have a lot of legitimacy and equity with the community, but they are also putting themselves on the line sometimes by taking a different stand, by saying, by coming up with an alternative message, and that takes a lot of courage for them, and sometimes it takes also them in a way bargaining their status, you know, in the community, or at least putting their status at risk in the community. So how have you, in your different experiences, addressed this, and what are some of the strategies that you have used to give them a sense that you know, to at least give them a sense that they are not alone, that they are part of something, that they are not alone within the religious community. Rabia, would you like to say something maybe about that?
Yeah, at least in Pakistan, we've worked with, we have 2 programs, we have total of 3 programs in Pakistan, but we have 2. One of them is on interfaith harmony and peace building, and then we have the gender justice program. With our interfaith harmony and peace building program, we have religious leaders from the very top of, you know, like national level leaders who have political linkages as well. They are the kind of people who, if they give a fatwa, it's going to pretty much be applied across the country. But these religious leaders, we feel like they have their different audiences, they have like their own other agendas. They actually, I mean, to work with those religious leaders is very, very complex. I don't think it can really be done because, I mean, many of them, you know, their political implications, all of that, they will not really. So what we did was we worked with more community level religious leaders. So in the villages we are working in, people who are like sitting down in the mosques and doing the sermons, people of that level, who may not have as much outreach, but the people who do have outreach too will really listen to them. So building up coalitions of religious leaders like that, like the 5 religious leader forums we've had, you know, like-minded religious leaders getting together, not being super rich or super powerful, but the middle tier.
Yeah.
That's how we do it.
Okay. Prabhu, is that something also that you have experienced? And yeah,
I think there's always resistance, but I think one thing that's really worked well for us in the work that we did is having the leadership buy into this, you know, what we wanted to do, and that was primarily that thing. We wanted to end sexual violence, and our conversations with faith leaders or the Christian archbishops, etc., didn't go gradually, you know, into masculinities. You know, it didn't just straight away go into masculinities. What I'm trying to say is that we started talking about sexual violence and the need to end sexual violence, the need of survivors, and then we started talking about them acknowledging and, you know, understanding that sexual violence, these survivors are from our own communities and they are in our churches, and then talking about behaviors that perpetuate these harmful attitudes, and these are also people who are in the church and the perpetrators, and then talking about things that we can do, like harmful notions of masculinities. I think that really kind of worked for us. Like I said, the archbishops, etc., you know, they have that power within that structure to influence, and then to have that consistency in saying this is what our theology is. And another thing that we use is peer. When we work in networks of, you know, other denominations, we use some of these leaders to kind of reach out to them. For instance, during the 16 days, the Bishop of Kigali is sending out a letter to all the church leaders of all denominations, asking them to join along with them as they are speaking out on this issue. So I think that works a lot, because they co-influence, and then also they have that peer, and then sometimes people feel pressurized not to do about this because everybody else is doing it. And one of the key things that we work for us with our HIV/AIDS work is to say, because if we are the church and we are the body of Christ, then the body of Christ is infected with HIV and AIDS. And so again, we are talking about the same thing here. The body of Christ has experienced sexual violence, and then so transforming the language and being sensitive, and also then using, you know, key channel allies and critical voices to kind of lobby. I think that works a lot.
Yeah, I think this idea of being part of something, being part of a community within the community, is something very important. Mpo, do you want to also add something on that?
Is the disadvantage of speaking the last?
Don't worry, I'll give you the floor first later. Yeah.
Like all the points are already taken.
Yeah.
But with me, I think resistance usually comes with that if the leaders are not really empowered, if they don't know, I mean, you hijack a pastor and say, Pastor, I need you to talk about gender equality, and this poor pastor has no idea what gender equality is at the end of the day. But we found that we've done trainings on the one-man can with them, and you find that at the end of the 5 days workshop, they have a sense of understanding, and they have that will to want to go and make a change in the community and want to really speak out. So for me, I think resistance usually is when they don't have any information or any empowerment at all.
We have a lot of questions. Yes, you had your hand up before. So if you can please introduce yourself.
Okay. I'm from Norwegian Church in Ethiopia. So I could share most of the things that have been said by the Pakistan office. But I just want to kind of comment or give input to what we've been discussing, because we have also the experience. I have just a few questions for the South African Unity Front. Maybe I want to kind of give input also from the questions that you raised, how we bring it in Ethiopia. One thing we have to really understand is faith within the Christian is also diverse, and it's not homogeneous. Particularly in the case of us, like where we have Orthodox, Catholic, and Evangelical. Even the Catholic in Ethiopia might not be the same in South Africa. So it's very important to really understand, when we really work with faith-based organizations, we have to really understand their context, and including the culture and others. But interestingly, in Ethiopia, what we have done is we start from the leadership, because as might not be the same in Pakistan, but because the leadership, if you really get the buy-in to the leadership, and then it's easy then to institutionalize. That's what we have really learned. Once they've really, maybe I can give example of FGM, where we have done a remarkable job by the faith-based organization. Like the Ethiopian Orthodox, they have really came up with 80-page sociological reflection on FGM. So interesting, because they really have been, convinced in it, and then the bishop has really decided that this has to be done, but it took us some time, 2 years. So it's not that easy. But then they came up with their scriptures, their theological reflection, which is 80 pages, talks about gender equality. And it's very interesting, so rich document. So then they came up with a declaration. Of course, the declaration is not the end, but they have the background for that. So they are so proud of. So then it's the issue of cascading this issue into theological college, into different groups. You don't establish groups in this, because they have, women groups, different faith groups in their scripture. So I think it's really important to sustain also the issue, because we've done kind of an assessment of the evangelical. 90% of the clergy or the friends in the theology, they go back to their congregation. If you really put in the curriculum, that's it. And they don't even need your money, So it's really important that such issues are really coming, but really we should also understand their challenge as well. I have different views as from others. We tend to say that they really pressurize. But I think these people are also, though they are priests, they are from the community, so we still have a challenge. So I think it takes time. We have to give them space also, and it takes time also. I think it's really important. Maybe my question is to Peer Fund. You mentioned about you're working on survivors. So we want to know also if you are addressing perpetrators, because we want to take this also, because we're working with UNFPA now as an executive agency and also on GBD. So we want to really know how to really address this issue also. And also the cascading aspect, like they have theoretical interpretation issues, but how do you really work on the grassroots? How are you really taking that from the leadership to the grassroots?
Okay, thank you. We're going to take a few more questions, and then we will move to, and then we'll come back to you. Yes, please, you had a question.
Okay, my name is Junianti from Indonesia, National Commission on Violence Against Women. I would like to share a little bit how Indonesia has been experienced with using religious approach combining with human rights. We try to, and this is working to handle violence against women, we try try to ask the religious leaders to hear the victims' voices, because mostly the religion coming from the sky, but we try to develop new methodology. The religion should coming from the ground, from below. So after hearing the victim's voice, we encourage them to have new interpretation about gender justice, etc. And afterwards, we encourage these religious leaders to institutionalizing this progressive idea at the institutional decision. So this is and we, as a national human rights institution, we try to translate human rights to the religious language in the community. I would like to share this first, but I would like to have another question.
Yeah.
How do you deal with the politicization of the religion? I mean that how do you deal with the the religion and the state? Sometimes they marry and very become a strong and powerful authority.
Yeah, yeah.
Especially related to the women's issues. Even at the moment, the backlash that the human rights coming, gender human rights coming from the West, and using real state ornaments, state power, especially at the parliament, and using discriminatory bylaws, using Sharia law, especially in the Indonesian context from Asia, etc. So if you have any kind of experience how to prevent or to deal this kind of
Yeah, I'm gonna take two more questions, then we'll turn back to the panel. Yes.
Hi, I'm Akanksha. I'm doing my master's in gender studies. So I don't have a first-hand experience, but I have tried working with narratives of RSS women. That RSS is basically a right-wing Hindu group, and I have tried working with the narratives of these women. So one thing that you all shared, I mean, power of religion cannot be denied, but once I'll just try quoting a narrative where she was asked that, what do you think about domestic violence, and you're a women's movement, a women's movement, how do you deal with it? She said, as soon as a woman will submit to the husband, as she should, domestic violence won't happen. This is the narrative that I'm quoting. So, and these are many more for all the different issues. That today we hear that they won't wear short clothes, and this is a women-based, women organization. So when we deal with a feminist, sort of a feminism that they claim to be, and that we can share a sort of, I'm not familiar with Islam, and I'm with my hesitant, or sort of Sabah Mahmood sort of argument that she makes in Politics of Society, that this submission is the exercise of agency. This submission is the exercise, I mean, something becomes so centrally critical that if we try to gain the short-term goals, like, gender-based violence and what you're doing, we are also getting more deeper into something which has this sort of a dynamic to it. One. Second thing is also that when religion and state speak together, I think we in India presently are at a point where we do not even have a point where we can differentiate between religion and state. And it's not overt. It's very covert. We are selling development and we are so imbibed into religion. How do you then, in that situation, can use religion? Is something that...
Thank you. Yes, one more.
Related question. My question is, what is your experience with the religion leaders about their perception, which comes from perceptions and thoughts and information which comes from Bible and Quran in terms of gender justice? How do they look the women and men rights when they consider the Quran and Bible's messages? Because in Turkey we have some serious problems about their perceptions, because they don't believe that according when they get the references from Quran, they don't believe that the men and women are equal. The women can think sophistically, or women have a different nature that is not equal with the men. And how do you work with them when they consider the references from Quran? They can experience, like the lady said,
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So I'm going to turn back to our panelists. I know we're getting to the end of our time, but I think we can extend a little bit, no? Yeah. So we had several comments about the cascading and how do you start from the top and then come down, which are things that you addressed also in your presentations. The issue of politicization of religion and the relationship between religion and the state that both of you addressed, and how to, what is the tension basically that emerges there, and then finally also this issue of perception of the scriptures, and I think that's a really also important point, because the question is there an inherent contradiction? Is there something that we cannot change, even if we use? Yes, there are multiple interpretations, and there is not one homogeneous voice, but in the end, what do the texts really say, and is it possible to actually make our argument? I think that is really a fundamental question at the heart of this work. So, as promised, Mpoye will be the first one answering the questions.
Me and my big mouth. Well, what I have here, I may not really address some of the...
No, whichever ones you want to address. Yeah.
There was a question on work in prisons, if there is work that is being done with the perpetrators. There is a faith-based organization that we work with called Men as Peacemakers from the Southern African Catholic Bishops Conference. They currently are doing some work in prisons with the perpetrators, because they felt that there is also need to engage the perpetrators in that, if someone may be arrested because of raping or abusing, and they may not really know that this thing that they did is really wrong. So what they do, they also do trainings for them to show them how gender-based violence is bad, and the reason why they are in prison is because they violated a woman or a child like this and like that. And the other thing that they are also trying to do is the issue of reintegration of that prisoner who has been in prison for maybe, I don't know how many years, but how then does the community accept him back into the community, despite the fact that he has served his term, his jail sentence, and what does it mean again to the survivor of that abuse? So it's something that is still new that they are working on. I'll be happy to share it sometime when we see how it's going to work out. And on the issue of the religion and state, it's just a personal observation. If you may ask me, or if I may ask you, who's the president of South Africa? I'm sure most of us wouldn't know. But if I ask you, who's the religious leader in South Africa that you know, most will say Desmond Tutu. So I honestly feel religious leaders somehow have an upper hand. But again, it differs according to the context in countries and areas. So I'm being biased to South Africa. And the issue around submitting to your wives, like I had earlier on said, it depends. There's one text, but multiple interpretations. Most people use this verse to say, if a woman does submit, then she will never be abused because she is submitting and the husband was never there, hit her at all. And again, if you interpret the text again in another way, we say as human rights activists, we say that is a huge no-no. A woman should be liberal, she should also be vocal and be able to stand for her own rights. So it's really quite tricky on that. And I'll stop there.
Okay.
Yes. In terms of your question with regards to working with perpetrators, no, we don't work with perpetrators directly. So I don't have, we don't do perpetrator rehabilitation, nothing like that. But most of our programming is around, addressing perpetrator behaviors. And in terms of how do we go to grassroots, the parishes, we work with the parishes and the province office and the dioceses. So basically, the information that you see from the study are from the parishes, and we go back to them with the information and the trainings that we do. So we, instead of me training, we train the top level leadership so that they have the broader banner of which they work within, and the theology and acceptance and the consistency. And at the grassroots levels, then we have the lay leaders and champions who will spearhead this cause. In terms of how do we? I mean, I think the question about religion and state. I think then again, I think it's definitely a problematic thing. I come from Sri Lanka, where Buddhism, everybody's here heard. But I think then it becomes even more critical to engage faith leaders if they are so influential in policies. Because the policies, if you look at policies in Rwanda, even around gender equality, it's been influenced, and so they have a family policy. So it's very family oriented. So all about the well-being of the family. So then if you want to engage in that, then you need to be able to have this conversation, because who makes policies and who are policies made for? We vote these people into power, we contribute to the policy and the practice of the policies. So I think it's important that if we want to change, then you have to change those influencers who have massive influences over these people. And because the biggest resistance for policies come from these people, the religious leaders that we're talking about. So if we can engage them, I think then there's an important role that they can play. In terms of the perception of gender justice, I think generally often people don't believe women and men are created equal, but I think fundamentally in the scriptures there is absolutely clear theology around men and women were created equal in the image of God. Women were created in the equal image of God. And it only doesn't say equal image of God, but it says image of the Trinity, because the Bible has the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, different in nature, different, but they're equal in power, equal in value, and it says created to dominate and rule over the earth together. So I think that's something that we go back to. That's Genesis chapter 1 and 28. So that's the beginning, and everything else, and finding the thing. So I think that is a great foundation that we have that we can engage with. And of course there's resistance, because you're asking massive power institutions and people to say all of a sudden start acknowledging. But you have to recognize the church is changing. There are more female bishops and some of the parishes that I work with, the biggest parishes are led by female pastors, and that's challenging the people also to see. And they're not just serving, but they're being served. And I think so I do see of course there's resistance, but there's definitely a positive thing that's happening. I'm done.
Okay, thank you. Rabia.
Okay, starting from the politicization of religion, Pakistan is only one of the 2 countries in the world that was created on the basis of religion, and we are an Islamic state. We weren't created as an Islamic state, but we were made into an Islamic state. So you can understand how problematic the whole state and thing is. I mean, we explicitly say we are the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. And when we had this military dictator, Zia, in power, he put in laws that are just atrocious. So, for example, we had hudud laws, where girls who got raped were put in jail for adultery, because they had kind of admitted that the act had happened, but they couldn't prove that it wasn't consensual. They couldn't prove that somebody else did it forcibly. So they were in jail. So many, like hundreds and thousands of women were just languishing in jail for rape, for adultery, although they had been raped. So things like that, that was politicization of religion, which is still a problem. But we had a women's rights movement in response to that, and it's been there since the 80s. And in the last 10 years, we've had 10 pro-women laws. We've changed that particular law, which was actually putting the rape victims in jail. We've got a Women Protection Act now. It's still not easy. We have all these parallel, we have these Sharia laws, and then we have the secularish constitution, and we have all these things that contradict each other, and it's a big mess, but we're working on it. And we have made progress. I think it is important to present alternatives from other Muslim countries, more progressive ones. Turkey, I would have said, and other places. We're all facing challenges, but I think, for example, there's a Middle Eastern country which has done something really well recently. Recognized gay and lesbian marriages or something, I don't know. Anyway, Morocco or Tunisia, I believe, has done something recently. So it is important to look at the broader perspective. With regards to women and women saying submission is a form of agency, even in Pakistan, once we had another military dictator, Musharraf, in power, and he had all these women who were very religious-seeming women, but basically he was co-opting the women to say, look, we've got so many women in the parliament, but they were the ones saying, we want to give our husbands the right to have a second marriage without asking us. Because why is the constitution making, currently the constitution says if a man marries again, he needs permission from the first wife, which is something good that it's in the constitution. But these women were like, no, this is not in Islam. Why is the Pakistani state giving extra protection to the women? Let's get rid of it. So having women like that, co-opted women, it is very, very problematic. At the same time, we have to realize women are not a monolith. There are different sorts of women, and that's why it was important for different religious women. I mean, we've got alimas now, female religious leaders, studying the religion from a proper institution, coming out accredited, and we need to have all of these different voices on the table. There are amazing Islamic feminists doing work, and with Islam the problem is it's all in Arabic. So Urdu is our language, Turkish might be yours. It's not Arabic. So there are Arab scholars like Fatma Mirnissi, Moghadam, others doing work, and there's a reformist translation of the Quran. Women have not typically translated the Quran. I think it needs to be done. It is being done. And Musawa, which looks at jurisprudence and actually, you know, like some of the problematic verses like 434 about the wife-beating verse, they've reinterpreted it differently. People have done PhDs on this. There is amazing stuff out there. Not a problem to, like, basically get different women's voices on board. And about like the problem of politicized states, don't let, like in the Pakistani context, we are a Muslim state, right? So we would like to use religious platforms to give our message, not give them our platform for their message. If India is secular so far, like technically it's secular, so there's no reason to promote religion. Like the point is not to preach like all of us are saying. The point is to get the right message across. You have to be
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rabia. We're going to stop actually because I got some signals that we have to vacate the room, and I'm sorry, I know many of you had many questions, but I encourage you to continue the discussion. I'm not going to try to summarize, but I just want to come back to one thing, which is this point at the beginning that I was talking about, the men looking into the mirror and realizing that they actually have a gender. And I thought it was very powerful, the example of the religious leader who didn't give his sister her share and was ashamed of it. Or the example of the man who said, I realized I have been raping my wife when I thought I was just, you know, having sex, basically. So, you know, this kind of realization, whether it's of a religious leader or men in the community, but individual by individual, is really what this is all about and why we're here at this symposium. So thank you very much, everybody, and I hope you can continue the discussion over lunch. Thank you.
Let me give you a part of my...
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So,